Okay, once again, uh, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, my dear students. Okay, so I really feel honored today because of the fact that I'm sharing the same platform with Susan Bassett. Susan Bassett is a person whose book I, my colleague, Professor Selim, we use in our translation studies classes, both in the undergraduate and graduate classes. And that book is called Translation Studies. And that book probably is one of the first books written in this discipline. And it was published only in 1980s, in 1980, if I'm not wrong. So this is a long time ago this book was published, and during that time, translation studies was really accepted as a discipline. Before that, translation was not taken very seriously. It was just a link between two things, just a link, a red link. So that kind of honor given to translation. But people like Susan Bassett, Jeremy Monday, and many others, because of them, translation studies have become a prestigious discipline today. Now, my paper will give a more or less general view of translation studies, and I will try to focus on two aspects of translation studies, or rather translation. One is a creative activity. It's not just translating mechanically from one text into another. It's a creative activity, and you have to have a creative genius in order to translate well. So that is one of my propositions. And the second proposition is translation is creative, as well as it should be taken into the genre. It should be accepted as an independent genre, like prose, poetry, play, or essay. So translation can be a genre. I call it polysystems genre, a kind of umbrella genre under which all other genres are accommodated. So these are two of my propositions. Now let us start the essay. It will take nearly 35 minutes, so I hope you have patience. So today I would like to explore briefly the intricate realm of translation, which I propose to conceptualize as a creative enterprise rather than merely a mechanical process of transposing words from one language to another. The very act of translation, or more broadly, transformation, serves as a mirror reflecting the dialectics inherent in both nature and the human mind. This dynamic interplay has been underappreciated for far too long and relegated translation to a secondary status in the world of literary and artistic pursuits. A little bit of historical context of translation studies. To appreciate the significance of translation in the contemporary landscape, we must first acknowledge the historical context in which translation studies emerged as a legitimate academic discipline. It was not until the late 20th century that translation drew the attention it deserves within academic circles. For centuries, translation existed on the periphery, often viewed as a mere service, a bridge between languages rather than a creative act in its own right. This relegation stems from a misunderstanding of both the nature of translation and the process of creativity itself. The perception of translation as secondary is deeply rooted in historical contexts. In ancient societies, translating sacred texts was often seen as a divine calling, a task reserved for the chosen few. The translation of the Old Testament from Hebrew into Greek in the 3rd century BC and the Bible into Latin by Saint Jerome in the 4th century AD, for instance, was marked by a sense of reverence that rendered the translator almost invisible in the process. There is a myth about translating the Old Testament into Greek. It is said that in the 3rd century BC, it is said that 70 or 72 monks, Christian monks, were put into 70 or 72 cells, and they were given to translate the Old Testament from Hebrew into Greek or Greek. And when they came out after a certain period, maybe 40 days, they completed translating the Old Testament. And it was found that everybody's translation was the same. Everybody's translation was the same. This is, I think it's a myth. It's a myth. It's called Septuagint. Septuagint, that means 72 persons involved in translating the Old Testament. And how come that became same for everybody? It also shows one thing, that translators did not have any individuality. They were lacking in individual input. That's why their works, their translations became the same. Another thing maybe that politically scriptures are one and the same all the time. It cannot be changed. It cannot be different from one to another. That can be another concept behind this myth. Anyway, so that's interesting. I find it very interesting, and it also shows the invisibility of the translator. The translator's individual entity is gone. It was gone for many, many years. Only in the late 20th century it was revived. And Professor Sudan is one of the frontier fighters about making translation a prestigious work. Over time, this perspective has changed. The rise of post-colonial studies and the emphasis on cultural studies in the late 20th century prompted scholars to reevaluate the role of translation. Thinkers such as Edward Said, in his landmark work Orientalism, Guy Spivak in his Politics of Translation, emphasized the power dynamics inherent in translation, suggesting that it is a means of cultural negotiation and representation. The shift in thinking laid the groundwork for recognizing translation as an active engagement with text rather than a passive transfer of meaning. Now, I will give you some idea about nature of translation, nature of creativity in translation. In contemplating the nature of creativity, we must consider the fact that human beings, far from being pure creators, are in fact borrowers and assimilators and name givers, title givers. When our poet Rabindranath says, "Amari chetona range panna holo সবুজ চুঙে ভরে উঠল রাঙা হয়ে." So this poem, you can find it in, this is called Ami. The name of the title of the poem is Ami. You can find it in Rabindranath. The translation, English translation of this can be, in the color of my consciousness, the emerald becomes green, ruby red. When he said this, Rabindranath, he perhaps means that the world does not exist beyond human consciousness. Somewhat like the sophists in ancient Greece, who said that man is the measure of everything. But it is not so. I'm sure Einstein would have differed from Rabindranath on this issue, that things exist independent of human existence or human consciousness. Humans do not have the inherent power to make emerald green, but only to give a name to the color, which is already there regardless of human consciousness. In fact, we are creatures of experience, gathering fragments of knowledge and inspiration from the vast tapestry of our natural and cultural worlds. The filmmaker Jim Jarmusch articulates this sentiment when he remarks, "Nothing is original," and encourages us to steal from anywhere that resonates with inspiration or fuels our imagination. And if you do this, your work will be authentic. And authenticity is invaluable. And originality is non-existent. So this is important that one has to be authentic. Translators must be authentic, not original, not necessarily original. So it's not where you take things from, it's where you take them to. So the objective is important. There's a theory in translation studies which is called scopus theory. Scopus is a Greek word which means objective. What's the objective of your translation? My objective is my reader in the target language. So that is important. I will translate in such a way that my readers can understand, they can accept it as their own. So that is what is meant here. It's not where you take things from, it's where you take them to. Now this perspective posits that our so-called creative endeavors are less about invention and more about the act of reconfiguring existing elements. Or in other words, putting water of different tastes and color or ingredients in it, in pots of different shapes and colors, and calling one poetry, the other prose or play or essay. I think this is what Rabindranath said in one of his essays, that the basic element is the same. It cannot change it. This is natural element. We only put them in different pots, in different colors. And one part is called poetry, another is called essay, another is fiction, novel, all this. So that is why I want to say here that nothing is original with human beings. So if you brag about writing an original novel, you should not do that, because we have taken from many texts. The translator translates from one text, but the so-called creative writer takes from various texts in the nature, those which are there in the nature. Indeed, we do not create in vacuum. In a vacuum, we do not create. Rather, we assemble, juxtapose, and reinterpret in various influences, the various influences that shape our understanding of the world. Take, for example, the story of traditional storytelling, which transcends cultures and epochs, the archetypes, motifs, and narratives we encounter in one culture often find voice in another. Consider the tale of a hero's journey, as articulated by Joseph Campbell in his Power of Me, or more vividly in his seminal work, The Hero of With 1,000 Faces. The hero, facing trials and tribulations, emerges transformed, a narrative structure that appears across cultures, from ancient mythologies to contemporary literature. In this sense, the act of translation is akin to the hero's journey itself. The translator, like the hero, embarks on a transformative odyssey, navigating the treacherous terrain between silas and charities of languages, cultures, and contexts. Silas and charities, you know, Homer's Odyssey. If you have read it, the Odyssey he is steering the ship through two dangers. One is Scylla. Scylla is a whirlpool, and no, Scylla is a hidden mountain in the sea, and Charybdis is a whirlpool. So if you avoid Charybdis, you will fly the Scyllas, and your ship will be broken. So that's kind of dichotomy, that kind of dangerous. A writer, a translator, always goes through. Now, the role of translator as a creative genius. This part I am also continuing the same creativity in the translator. At this juncture, it is imperative to emphasize the role of translator as a creative genius in their own right. While the source text provides the foundational material, it is the translator's ingenuity, imagination, and interpretive skills that breathe new life into the work. Without the creative touch of the translator, the afterlife of the source text remains dormant, its potential unfulfilled. Consider the iconic translations of works by literary giants such as Fyodor Dostoevsky, Khaliquzzaman Elias, and Richard Wright. Each translator faces the daunting task of conveying not only the words but also the emotions, cultural nuances, and philosophical depths inherent in the original text. A mere mechanical translation would strip away the richness of the source material, leaving behind a hollow shell that fails to resonate with the target audience. Take, for instance, the translation of Kazantzakis' Zorbadeli. A translator tasked with rendering Zorba's free, frank, and jovial approach to life into another language must grapple with the dialectics of both Zorba's and his creator's minds. The choice of words, the rhythm of sentences, and the ability to capture the emotional weight of the narrative all require a delicate balance between fidelity to the source and an understanding of the target culture's literary sensibilities. Now, how does this creative process work in the translator? The translator's creative process is marked by a series of choices, each laden with significance. A translator must navigate the labyrinth of two languages, making decisions that reflect their understanding of both the source and target cultures. These decisions shape the target text's ultimate expression, resulting in a unique manifestation that retains the essence of the source while offering something new, refreshing, and original. Consider the challenge of translating idiomatic expressions, which often pose significant hurdles for translators. The phrase kick the bucket, for example, may be easily understood in English as a euphemism for death. But how does one transfer that sentiment in another language? A word-for-word translation will not convey meaning. But all the major languages have euphemistic expressions for various situations. The translator therefore must exercise creative judgment, seeking an equivalent expression that captures the same emotional resonance while remaining faithful to the source text's intent. This process of negotiation between languages mirrors the artistic endeavors of painters, musicians, and writers. Just as an artist selects colors and brush strokes to evoke specific emotions, a translator chooses words and structure to elicit the desired response from their audience. Here, I would like to draw an analogy between two musicians in a duet playing two different instruments, say, for example, sitar and tabla. One is a percussion instrument, tabla, and the other string instrument, sitar. And they are responding or giving jawabis to each other's notes, combining and permuting the basic traits and logic of their instruments, both creating something original. So this is the relationship between the translator and the original text. So they are like two musicians giving jawabis. I think this is a beautiful analogy, probably first given by Dr. Johnson, normally in the 18th century, late 18th century. He was talking about probably Pope's translation of Homer. And Homer, he said that Homer is playing harpsichord there, and Pope is playing another instrument. I forget what instrument. But these two different instruments, because languages are different. So they are at play. They are playing and supporting each other. So that kind of relationship remains between the original text and the target text, or the translator and the original writer. Okay, then to further illustrate the creative dimensions of translation, let us briefly examine two case studies that exemplify the transformative nature of translation. First, I will take Gabriel Garcia Marquez's 100 Years of Solitude. It's a very famous novel. Gabriel Garcia Marquez's magnum opus, 100 Years of Solitude, has been translated into numerous languages, each iteration reflecting the translator's unique interpretation. The novel's magical realism poses particular challenges for translators as it requires an understanding of the cultural nuances and historical context of the Caribbean and Latin America. We know about Marquez's generous acknowledgement of the superiority of the English version to his original. Ravas's translation is celebrated indeed for its ability to capture the lyrical quality of the original while making it accessible to English-speaking audiences. Ravas's choice of words and narrative pacing highlight the novel's emotional depth, demonstrating how translation can breathe life into a text while remaining true to its essence. My second example is Nikos Kazantzakis' epic, modern epic, The Odyssey, a modern sequel. Now this epic he wrote in 1937 probably, and he took 12 years to write it. And it's 3 times bigger than Homer's Odyssey. So this is a modern sequel to Homer's Odyssey. And this example, Odyssey, a modern sequel translated by Timon Fryer, not that famous American poet, but the translation is excellent. I should say, so far I should call it the best translation so far I have read. The translator here followed a tenacious method of keeping in touch with the source author for more than 4 years. You see the tenacity of this person, and making sure through regular correspondence and a few meetings in person that he had been able to be at par with the poet to catch the surreal imagery, numerous metaphors, and philosophical musings that challenge translators to convey not only the literal meaning but the emotional resonance of the source poem. Timon Fryer has navigated the complexities of the Greek language with excellent skill and has made the English translation itself a work of art that enters the region of glory. He informs us that to suit the mental modes of Odysseus, the protagonist of this epic, the quick-witted Homeric hero, and to describe his various adventures in Africa and the Antarctica, Kazantzakis had to make up about 6,000 new words, which could not be found in any Greek dictionary. So remember, 6,000 new words he coined in order to write this huge epic, and it contains 33,333 lines, standard, and most of the lines are 17 syllables each. So it's a monumental work. It was published in 1937, and probably in 1957 it was, the English translation was published. Now, let me talk about the ethical dimension of translation. What ethics, infidelity, all these things. As we develop deeper into the creative effort of translation, we must also confront the ethical dimensions that accompany this practice. Translators bear the responsibility of faithfully representing the source text while going through the complexities of cultural appropriation, bias, and representation. The, the ethical implications of translation, however, extend beyond the act itself, influencing how we perceive and engage with other cultures. One ethical consideration is the notion of fidelity. While translators strive to remain faithful to the source text, they must also recognize the inherent challenges of cultural differences. A literal translation may fail to convey the emotional depth or cultural significance of the original. In this regard, the translator's creative judgment becomes crucial. They must maintain the delicate balance between fidelity to the original text and the need to make it resonate with the target audience. If, for example, the translator does not use Bangla slangs or some sort of non-standard Bangla that are equivalent to those that the downtown Negro boys use among themselves in Richard Wright's biofiction Black Boy, those lively urchins will fail to be authentic characters. Here, the translator needs to employ their creative judgment about the extent of such use. Now, the influence of literary movements. I think Professor Jai had touched a little bit about this in giving this brief address. We must also consider the influence of literary movements on translation. In the 19th century, the colonizer would think of their supremacy in all spheres. With this belief, when they would translate even a classic of the colonized, they would do it from a condescending approach. Something like this happened to the 19th century British poet, Edward Fitzgerald, when he translated the 11th century Persian poet Omar Khayyam, the Rubayats of Omar Khayyam. By translating from a work of an inferior culture, inferior within quotation marks, culture, even though Persia had a much older and richer cultural tradition than English, he thought, Edward Fitzgerald thought, he was giving status to the work of an inferior culture, inferior nature, and was thus doing a favor to the colonists. Thus, as Susan Bassett suggests, an inequality of translation relationship started to take shape in the minds of critics such as Gayatri Chakraborty Spivak, Tejoshini Niranjana, and Eric Shepis. They argued that translation was effectively used in the past as an instrument of colonial hegemony. The emergence of feminist and post-colonial critics has also significantly shaped the translation landscape. The translators are increasingly aware of the power dynamics involved in translation, striving to amplify marginalized voices and challenge dominant narratives. The translation of works by authors like Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie and Arundhati Raj exemplify this shape. Translators engage with these texts not only as linguistic exercises but as acts of cultural advocacy, raising voices that have historically been silenced or overlooked. Furthermore, we must consider the concept of intertextuality in translation. The notion that no text exists in isolation is paramount to our understanding of the translator's role in the creative process. Each translated work engages with a web of intertextual references, resonances, and echoes from other texts. When a translator approaches a source text, they bring with them a multitude of literary influences, prior translations, and cultural narratives that inform their understanding and interpretation. Now, my second proposition that translation should be included in the polysystems genre. To further elucidate the creative dimensions of translation, I propose that we view it as a polysystems genre, a convergence point where all of the genres of literature intersect. The perspective challenges the traditional notion of translation as a linear act and encourages us to consider the complexities and interconnections between different genres that define the act of translating. The polysystems approach recognizes translations from verse into prose, from prose into play, and even into verse, or maybe through intersemiotic translation, from fiction into film, from painting into poem, or from poem into painting, and so on. It suggests that texts do not exist in isolation. Rather, they are part of a broader cultural dialogue. When a translator engages with a source text, they are not simply reproducing words or phrases, they are participating in a rich tapestry of literary and cultural traditions. One illustrative example of this polysystems nature can be found in the translations of ancient Greek texts. Consider the Indian epics, the Rahman and the Mahabharata. Translations of these epics have varied significantly over time, reflecting not only linguistic and formative shifts, but also changes in cultural context and interpretation. Each translator brings their own sensibilities, experiences, and insights, resulting in a text that is not merely a reproduction but a reinterpretation, a new iteration that contributes to the ongoing dialogues of human experience. Now, my concluding part. In conclusion, as we discuss the complexities of our increasingly interconnected world, let us embrace translation as a creative endeavor, a dynamic act, and that transcends it, transcends the mere exchange of words. It is a journey of transformation, an artistic endeavor that requires ingenuity, empathy, and a profound understanding of the human experience like in any other genres of literature. It is not merely about fidelity to the original text, it is about the ability to reimagine and reinvigorate that text within a new cultural context. The translator stands at the focal paths of languages and cultures, embodying the spirit of creativity that permeates the act of translating. Sometimes, in inspired moments, it even happens that the translator feels that they are at one with the original writer and are producing an original work. In fact, this happened to Paul Valery when he was translating Virgil. He said that I became Virgil. So he felt at one with the original writer. Anyway, as we recognize the creative dimensions of translation, we elevate its status within the literary canon. Let us celebrate translation not merely as a means to an end, but as an art form in its own right, which brings all other genres under its umbrella, and with its immense potential, claims to be and recognized as an all-inclusive genre that transforms through different literary forms the way we perceive and engage with literature and culture. Thank you very much.